So we're going to start in a moment, so if you haven't had a seat, taken a seat already, somebody sat down. The closer you can get, the better you can go here.
So yes, first over to you.
Okay, I've been running a competition about saving energy around food, and I came up with a list and I asked people to think of innovative ideas that weren't on that list. And we've got quite a few really good ideas about saving energy, and I thought we might vote on them. So if I read through them first, I won't say who wrote them down. Eat raw, so don't cook. Cook in one pot. Bulk cooking, so buy your food in the market when it's cheap and then freeze it. Grow salad all the year round. Foraging. Have your hot meal in the middle of the day. It doesn't save energy, but it means there's less demand on the grid. Go on a diet, eat less. Collect berries for syrups, rose hips, etc. But do your research first, it says. So, can people put their hands up? If you just, well, you can vote. How am I going to do this?
I think you're going to have to read them out again. People can.
Yeah. So you can put your hand up once. Let's put it like that. So we don't have. We have two tellers, but they're
going to
not
try and count you.
Okay. Eat raw.
1, 2, 3.
Cook in one pot.
Do we only get one vote, do we?
One
Yeah.
vote. Buy from the market and cook and then freeze. Grow salad all the year round. Foraging. One over here. 3. Have your hot meal in the middle of the day. Go on a diet or eat less. Collect berries for syrups, rose hip, etc. Okay? So which one won? One pot cooking. This is embarrassing because
Is it you?
it's you.
No,
LMW.
No, I'm not Eleanor W. I'm Eleanor C.
Who's Eleanor W?
Somebody's gone. They've gone.
Okay, I've got their phone number, so I'll bring it back. Okay?
Brilliant, thank you.
Just to introduce our wonderful panel, and coming to stage, and I hope you don't mind being filmed. Actually, you won't be filmed, but you guys will be, so that we can share your wisdom. So this is Ross Mackham, who a lot of you know, he's the chair of Parish Council, and he's going to keep these big brains in order, and they will introduce themselves as we go through. But I think we're really, really lucky to have some of the country's leading people right here to spread their wisdom. So enjoy.
Brilliant, thank you, Sarah. I'll just stand up and introduce you. As Sarah said, we do have a very expert panel here. So I'm going to get them to introduce themselves in a moment, and then there are 3 short presentations, a bit more chats than presentations. What I would say is, if you have any questions, just ask as we go along. Right? Don't wait for we can wait for the end because we've got a little bit of time at the end, but just fire them in as we go along. The The idea is it's going to be very relaxed, and hopefully we'll have some interesting discussion, and these guys are going to share their knowledge with us. So let's start at the far end then. So Scott, do you want to just explain who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Scott Wheeler. I am a researcher in the Energy and Power Group, which is part of engineering science within Oxford University. My research interests are kind of around local energy systems, particularly technologies and data that enable those and help to kind of coordinate local energy systems and run them in the most optimum way.
Thank you, Sam.
I'm Sam Hampton. I'm also at Oxford University. I'm a social scientist, so I'm in the geography department, and I have a very broad range of research interests. So around this kind of social side of energy consumption and climate citizenship. So I'm actually working in a psychology department as well as at Oxford. I'm at Bath University, where I work on the psychology and public opinion around climate action. But the hat I'm wearing today is more to do with my work locally, and I led a project called Pathways to a Zero Carbon Oxfordshire, and worked with both Barbara and Scott on that, so I can say a bit more.
Barbara?
Hi, I'm Barbara Hammond. I'm the Chief Executive of the Low Carbon Hub, which is two social enterprises working together, one of which develops, owns and runs renewable energy installations, making the money that allows the other one to work with all of you lovely people in communities across Oxfordshire. And the one that owns things this year has gone through a real milestone, which means that we've become a medium-sized enterprise because we own £25 million worth of assets. And on the side where we work with the communities, we've also gone through a real milestone, which is that we now have over 40 community group members across Oxfordshire, of which Eynsham Green Tea is one of the very first. We've been working with them forever, and if you ever go past the village hall or the Roman Catholic Church and CPV on the roof, that is owned by us, but we share the profit of that with Green Tea to help them continue their work.
Thank you, Barbara. Can I just check before we start into the sort of chats, discussions, presentations, can anybody hear us all right?
No. Louder, please. I could just about hear you.
Shall we shout forward?
I was going to say, come closer. So we're going to start with Sam. So, and I know this took a little bit of research. So Sam is the lead author of PASCO. It's short, PASCO. So he's going to talk all about that report and what it means to us. So, over to you, Sam.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the context here is to go back not too far into history, but I work for the Environmental Change Institute, which is within the Geography Department. And back in 2014, the various bodies, Barbara was very much involved in commissioning this report called Oxfordshire's Low Carbon Economy Report. And it was funded by a consortium that included the Local Enterprise Partnership and the local authorities and the Low Carbon Hub. And that report was really trying to emphasise the potentials for the low carbon driven growth in the county, and it was very influential locally. It was used as a document that fed into the Oxfordshire Energy Strategy, the various economic plans that were developed by the county and the LEP. And so they were realising, as they were writing the energy strategy in 2019 or 18, and that it was ageing a bit. All the stats that they were using were kind of from 2012 to 13. So they came to us and said, we need an update. And we said, okay, but we think the world has changed. We can't any longer think about the economy, the low carbon economy, as a thing in itself. the entire economy has to shift to a sustainable footing. So previously it was about kind of clean technologies and the different business models and SMEs that might be driving the change. Now we're talking about how do we, across all sectors, how do we transition to net zero. So we're not the first people to think about this, and there's no point in us kind of going from first principles. So we used a lot of evidence that was out there already. So from the Committee on Climate Change and the National Grid have done some really good scenario modelling for how the UK as a whole can achieve net zero by 2050, which is obviously now legislation. But actually translating that to a county like Oxfordshire is a task worth doing, because we are not just average. Although, interestingly, coincidentally, we are 1% of land and 1% of population in Oxfordshire. So it scales quite nicely. But, of course, we don't have a very large city. We are, we're rural. There are some things that are unique about us. We have quite a large areas of outstanding natural beauty. We're probably not the best place to build wind turbines because there are windier places. There are some sunnier places, sadly. So it's kind of thinking through all of those things that are unique about Oxfordshire. Of course, what the first thing we think of is that we are, a global knowledge economy. The university, but also the entire kind of what we call the Oxfordshire innovation ecosystem is world famous. So it's that makes us also unique, as well as all our natural assets. So our job was to come up with some pathways, essentially, to inform policymakers like the county and all the district councils as well, who create local plans and then right down to neighbourhood plans, to give them some kind of evidence base to make those decisions. Obviously, a lot of this agenda is set nationally, and a lot of energy, as you know, actually is not devolved to the local area. It's run. We have a national grid for good reason. So it was a question of kind of understanding what policy levers we do have locally and which we actually need to campaign and lobby for at central government level. So we created these, we kind of used the framework set by National Grid to create 4 scenarios, one of which doesn't achieve net zero, so that's what we call our steady progression, where we kind of just take the policies that are already announced and kind of see where they get us to. And then the other 3 just are different kind of versions, because we wanted to say that, the pathway to net zero, we do have options. We don't have that many options, and all the ways we look, it involve some form of transformation. So the first one is we called it, what do we call it? Well, there was a technological transformation, and then there was a social transformation, and then the final one was Oxfordshire leading the way, which is a bit of, it's kind of the high, think of it as a high ambition one, really. And in the social transformation, we see a lot, we basically, it's kind of, it's what people like you are all here for, kind of driven from the ground up. So we see a lot of, we kind of, in that model, there's a lot of insulation and retrofit of homes, a lot of investment coming from communities in community activity and rooftop solar, but then also other things like flexibility, which I won't steal your line, I might talk all about flexibility, but that kind of thing that is really driven by householders and small businesses. And then to contrast that, we have the technological transformation, which is it basically takes this idea that people are not going to change, behaviour change is a non-starter, so what can we do if that's the truth, if that's the world we live in? So that's all about, well, the big story is hydrogen there. And although, interestingly, on hydrogen, even if you kind of go all great guns for hydrogen, you don't see any hydrogen really coming into play until 2035 and beyond. It's just still such a major challenge and very expensive. So there are reasons why that might be desirable or not, which we can get into perhaps. But so there's lots of hydrogen, much less kind of home energy retrofit, and so you have this situation where we still have leaky homes, but you just replace the gas boiler with a hydrogen boiler. and yeah, other things like in that one, I remember there's quite a lot. We don't go so hard on demand reduction. So in terms of kind of lifestyle, so at the moment, off the top of my head, I think it's like 1.5 cars per household in Oxfordshire. So we kind of see that trend continuing. So they're all EVs, obviously, but we still have a lot of private transport, much less active travel, for instance. And interestingly, in that that scenario, I think we have a lot. There's a whole chapter we have on land use, which really begins to show you where the trade-offs are. So land is essential for achieving everything in terms of solar generation, in terms of building new developments, which we kind of assume that there will be a lot of housing development in Oxfordshire because a lot of it is already committed. But how you build those is a key question, of course. But so in land, one of the key statistics that I'll stop talking in a minute, but maybe I'll just say this one, which is that at the moment in Oxfordshire we produce about 75% of the food that we consume in terms of calorific value. We don't just eat wheat because that's pretty much what we produce. So that's a key figure. So and as a rural county, that's a benchmark, I guess. But as pressures on land increase from things like housing development, things like solar, and we kind of have a figure in the report where, as a rule of thumb, we say to local policymakers that they should be thinking about allocating around 1% of land to solar, which is not much and won't make us all starve. But as other pressures come from, for example, producing biocrops for the future carbon capture and storage with bioenergy, which is the net part of net zero, then the amount of food that we produce goes right down. And I think in that scenario, we're talking about going down to kind of, I think, 40%. So that's a clear trade-off. So there's lots and lots of little bits in there in the report, but I guess there are trade-offs in getting to net zero. It's not all going to be easy and cheap.
And just one question here, Sam, perhaps two answers. Just give your definition of net zero, or the definition of net zero.
Yeah.
So
it's about from a geophysical perspective, it's about having no new greenhouse gas emissions produced in the atmosphere from a given territory, and that might be the UK, and obviously the UK legislation is for the UK, or it might be for Oxfordshire. We're quite clear that it doesn't really make sense to kind of say Oxfordshire should achieve net. It becomes a carbon accounting issue there, because obviously we recognise that most of our renewable assets are not in Oxfordshire. We don't have any offshore wind, so let's just stick to the UK achieving net zero. But one thing that is important there is that the idea of offsetting. So in the national grid, the way they achieve net zero is not by just planting loads of forests in Indonesia, because that's kind of a cop-out, but it is actually it's domestically achieved. So there is a lot of tree planting that happens in the UK, a lot of bioenergy that gets grown. And actually, when you really drill down into the data of national grid scenarios, you start seeing some slightly alarming assumptions that they make around the amount of bioenergy they think we need. Like, in fact, when we thought how much of that actually translated to land use in Oxfordshire, the data said we need to allocate about 40% of land to bioenergy. That's a terrible idea. So we that just tells us that the net part of net zero is highly politically sensitive, and it just really confirms the importance of cutting the gross bit, the emissions in the first place, the use of fossil fuels.
And summary then, in terms of Oxfordshire, then how well are we doing, and when could we get to net zero?
Okay, so yeah, the first couple of chapters in the report do talk about where we've been. So 2008 is the baseline that the county has chosen. Basically, is when data collection started happening properly. And the local authority set a target for halving greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 against the 2008 baseline. And we're basically on track for that, which is actually, I think, a really good news story. And the question is, are we still, how's it going? I think we have a fairly good chance of staying on track for 2030. Of course, as you can imagine, the low-hanging fruit are the first to get us there. And so the ways that has been achieved, there are lots of activities, but principally it's been the decarbonisation of electricity, which has largely been led by offshore wind. And then secondly, actually we've seen a lot of energy demand reduction, and that has been led by kind of product standards, energy efficiency standards of homes, of white goods. You might have seen that they've recently recalibrated that A to E scale. So now you can't buy a fridge that's any better than an E or D, but last year it was a AAA plus, so they've recalibrated it. So that, and a lot of that came from the EU as well, and although the UK pushed a lot of that legislation. So those are the two kind of big stories of how we reduce energy demand. But yeah, I'm feeling optimistic in the near term. After 2030, we have some things that are looking good, like the phase out of fossil fuel vehicles, which is definitely, I think that's one of the things that is on track on transport to get us to where we need to. But when it comes to the housing stock, we are well behind.
And so we sat here, residents of Eynsham, we're individuals. What are the top 2 or 3 things that we could do that has an impact?
There's a really good paper, in a Nature paper, that talks about individuals as having 5 roles, because I think too much attention gets put on individuals as consumers. But that is one. So the things we use and buy, and so thinking about that first, we've got, obviously, we were talking about food. That's a really, really big thing. Difficult to quantify, difficult to estimate, but we all know that we need to eat less meat and source things locally and eat seasonally. So food. So when I think about consumption, there are kind of 4 buckets. Our carbon footprint is largely made up by 4 buckets of emissions activities. There's food, there's energy use in the home, there's transport, and then there's buying stuff. So Amazon, etc. Or not Amazon, but still buying stuff. So those are the kind of 4 major components of our carbon footprint. So, I don't need to tell you all the kinds of activities that you can do there. So that's consumption. Then there's influencing. So how can we influence others? So that might be in our families, our friendships, our own social network, or in communities. So that's really important. And there's lots of talk. There's lots been written about the importance of talking about climate change. So just there's some people who say if you're going to only do one thing for climate change, talk about it. Talk to people who are either singing from the same hymn sheet as you or not. Those conversations are more difficult, but it's really, really important. We need to get this into the social discourse. So influencing.